Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to record this video to sort of talk about Hurricane Dorian and sort of address everything that's gone on in the last few days. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I possibly can in this video on Dorian. And if you have any further questions, please direct them to the comments and I will respond as quick as possible. So what you're looking at here now on the screen is radar imagery of Hurricane Dorian from Puerto Rico. Now, as of right now, it is a Category 1 hurricane that is sitting just to the northeast of Puerto Rico, moving to the northwest fairly rapidly for a hurricane. This morning, if I pause this radar imagery here for a second, it was all the way down here. I mean, it's really moving pretty quickly. And one thing I want to note is this morning, the hurricane kind of did something that I found cool that I kind of want to address real quick. It was moving right for these islands here. You see these islands sitting right here. And the hurricane really did this sort of thing. Kind of came and then avoided the islands and did that. Now, hurricanes don't want to interact with land. They don't. They want to stay over the warm waters where they can keep building up their strength. And so, much like living creatures, they sort of navigate their way around to best fit that ability to survive. That's just something that I thought was cool that I kind of wanted to share with you guys. As I said, this is Hurricane Dorian right here on your screen. As I said, moving to the northwest fairly rapidly. And since yesterday, where it's at now is nowhere near where Dorian was predicted to be. The storm was predicted to sort of have to thread the needle between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. I believe that's Hispaniola. I could be wrong. I'm fairly certain though. But the storm was supposed to come up through here like that. But the issue was, why didn't this happen? Well, there's an issue with the models yesterday where the center of Dorian was sort of sitting right here. And for some reason, the models kept having the center here in this area. And that's at the current hour that the models are being initialized. So really, there shouldn't be any disagreement between what's actually happening in the models at that point. So, for some reason, the models kept taking this on a southern track up through here, when in reality, Dorian was moving more on this sort of track. So, I don't know what was happening with the models yesterday. I don't know if there was a technical issue with, or some environmental factor yesterday that was interfering with every single model. I mean, every single model was doing this, even the European, the GFS, the ones that are usually more, reliable, really weren't lining up, and it was kind of confusing. I noticed that last night. Someone brought it up on Twitter, and I realized that. I'm like, why isn't this following? So I'm guessing there was some environmental factor that was messing with or inhibiting the model's ability to sort of see where the storm is. It looks like they got that corrected today. The models look much more accurate now, at least as of currently. So we're going to jump right into that now, moving away from this satellite imagery, radar imagery. We're going to go look at satellite imagery now. So this is, I believe, over the last few hours. You can see the dark sort of move across the screen. That's fading from dark to day. So this is from the start of the morning to now. And you can see at the start of the morning, Dorian was kind of just blob, kind of just sitting here. And as the day goes on, you can see it become much more organized. Even right here in the middle, when it comes back to it, you can even see an eye start to develop right in the middle of that circle there. It's really starting to get more organized, and the reason for this is hurricanes don't like dry air in the atmosphere. It kills them. Sometimes, if you can get dry air into a hurricane, and as long as it doesn't go into the eye, it actually can make the storm a little stronger. It's very hard for a hurricane to do that because oftentimes it gets into the eye and ends up disrupting the circulation of the hurricane. Now, over here in the Gulf, there's a lot of dry air sitting there. And even back here, it was amazing that Dorian formed as such a small storm because there's a lot of dry air back in there. And the initial path of Dorian coming through here, they had it cutting through some fairly dry air. And then the mountains of Hispaniola and even Puerto Rico. And that's why they had the storm weaker yesterday, dropping down to maybe 45 miles per hour as a tropical storm, maybe even 40. Because, those interactions would sort of weaken the system before it got over here into the warmer waters and re-strengthen. But the issue is, over here, there is no dry air. I mean, there's a tiny bit maybe right in here, but there's really no dry air out in front of the system. So it really has nothing inhibiting it. Storms also don't like wind shear at all. It sort of tears them apart because hurricanes have two levels. There's a circulation on the lower level of the atmosphere, and there's a circulation up a few thousand feet, maybe even about 10,000 feet up in the atmosphere. And for hurricanes to really reach their max potential, those have to be aligned. And oftentimes, what wind shear will do is it'll take this rotation and tilt it. And when it's tilted and they're not aligned, hurricanes aren't able to sort of support themselves as much. It disrupts the typical mechanism within a storm. And so there used to be wind shear. There's actually still some wind shear left over here. There's a fairly low, moderate amount of shear that might try to inhibit the storm a little bit, but it's fading as we speak. And over here, over the Bahamas, there's very little wind shear. Nothing that's really going to inhibit the storm too much. So the environmental factors are really looking in Dorian's favor. And why the storm is going to move in sort of this direction rather than, doing this is because over here, excuse me one second, over here we have a low pressure system that's sort of steering the storm. And over here, there's a low pressure system. And so between those two, the storm's going to do that. You have the low pressure here that's sort of steering it off to that direction. And then this low pressure is also going to force it that direction. So that's why the storm's sort of taking this unnatural track. It's not often that you see the track of hurricanes, coming up through the Bahamas, turning into Florida. That just doesn't happen too often because the Gulf Stream, which is a very warm area of water that hurricanes like to feed on, runs like this. It curves off that direction. So usually they come up here and follow that. Hurricane Michael a few years ago came up through here, followed the Gulf Stream. It came very close to the Florida coast, but it didn't turn into the coast. Irma sort of came up through here, but because it was on this side, it was able to come back up. The Gulf water is just warm by itself, so there's no really stream of water moving. It's just a warm area of water because of how shallow it is. So now we're going to take a look at the models. As I said, you can see the satellite here. Dorian is looking more and more impressive on satellite, especially within the last few hours. It's really starting to get its act together as it moves into the more favorable conditions. So we took a look at the National Hurricane Center and their forecast for Dorian. What they have, this is the forecast cone right now. So Dorian is sitting right here, right now. They have the storm continuing to move to the northeast as a hurricane. Now, once we get to 72 hours out from now, which is, I believe, August 31st, which is Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Saturday morning, Eastern time. 105 mile per hour hurricane, Category 2. This is a Category 2 hurricane at this point, gusting to 125 miles per hour. Now, right before it gets landfall, remember how I said this region had really warm water? This region right here. Very warm water. 85, 90 degree water just off the Florida coast. This is going to allow Dorian to strengthen more and to eventually, as predicted here, become a 115 mile per hour, gusting to 140 mile per hour Category 3. And even right before landfall, it maintains that strength. That's looks to be September 2nd. That's going into Monday morning. It will be close to making landfall. As of right now, this is very likely to change. We're still way out, almost a week out at this point. So models have already changed within the last 24 hours. There's no reason they can't change further. And there's some disagreement in the models right now. So where this is going to go is anybody's game. So we take a look at that. We're going to first take a look at the European model, which is widely regarded, I don't know if you've heard me mention this before, as the better model in hurricane forecasting. This could take a second. The site that I'm using is a lot of traffic on it right now. So it's loading a little slowly, so we'll get some time here to load. So this is going back 48 hours ago. You see I have the entire, let me zoom into the southeastern U.S. Maybe you get a better view of exactly where everything is. So this is the southeastern U.S. You see Florida here, Cuba, the Bahamas. Right now, Dorian is nowhere in sight. Like I said, it's still a week out. You have plenty of time. So we moved to current time. You see Dorian still here. You see this little area of low pressure here. It's just a low pressure system that moved off the eastern coast throughout the course of the week. Not much of a threat. Tropically, just your typical low pressure system that the atmosphere often has. Now, as we move forward in time, see, there's Dorian right there. Oops, didn't mean to do that. You see Dorian 48 hours from now start to peek in here, just sort of start to come in. And as we go forward in time, this is a European model. A 989 millibar that's consistent with Category 2. 977, now you're getting close to Category 3, possible mid-level Category 3 hurricane. You go in there, 983 as it crosses the southern Florida coast. Let me emphasize that. The southern Florida coast, according to the European model. This has basically coming right over Lake Okeechobee, as a fairly substantial Category 3 hurricane. The one thing I will say that is consistent across the models is the current strength. With the environmental factors that are out ahead of this, Category 3 strength is quite possible. So, as I said, the European model has it coming across the state of Florida, going into the Gulf, and strengthening further. Possibly to Cat 4 status at that point. 970 is fairly low pressure, possibly high in Cat 3. 963, as you see, the wind fields start to expand as well. So this storm is going to grow as well because it has all this energy, so it has to be able to, alleviate that out. Once you hit a certain point, the storm's just going to expand more rather than just keep getting tighter. It's a very small system right now. As it gets stronger, it should expand a little bit. I don't expect it to expand too much because, as I said, the wind shear helps expand the storm out. It spreads the winds out over a farther distance, which makes them less strong overall. You think of it like a ballerina pulling its arms in when they're spinning. It makes them go faster. So when you leave the arms out, the overall wind speeds are slower. But this is a fairly small system, and it shouldn't grow too much regardless because there's not a lot of wind shear. So I don't expect it to, really grow too large. But looking in the future, you see 963 millibars, very strong storm at this point, going into the Florida Panhandle, almost to Pensacola, really almost the path of, I believe it was Michael last year. There's two Michaels, one that hit the eastern coast and one last year that's sure to be retired as it was a Category 5 hurricane. So we won't have another Hurricane Michael, I assume, ever. So you see it coming right here, just to the west of where Hurricane Michael went last year, into the Florida coast before weakening over land. You see a very large wind field. As it hits land, it's going to expand more as it weakens. The circulation is not going to be as tight, so it'll allow the wind field to expand out. But still a fairly strong storm inland. Wind speeds of upwards of 65 knots, which is really high. If I can pull up, I don't know the conversion for knots to miles per hour in my head. But, 60 knots is fairly 69 miles per hour. It's still just below Category 1 strength at that point as it's over land. It's fairly substantial that far inland. And as you see, it moves off before catching a trough in the atmosphere, which is just a dip in winds and pressure, and before it carries off to the east through Georgia, Carolina, South Carolina, into the Atlantic again, where it could possibly re-strengthen before it continues to move off into the Atlantic. Now, we take the more concerning model to me right now is the GFS. I know the GFS has this rap for being, often wrong, often inferior to the European model, but it has been right before. And plus, last year they upgraded the GFS to the GFS FV3, which is a new improved weather model that sort of tries to emulate more of what the European model does with certain weather factors. So this will be, I think, the first time it's really tested against it. But right now, its forecast is widely different in location currently than the European model is. And the GFS also updates more often than the euro, so that's worth noting as well. So the next run of the European model might change. If that does happen, I'll update you guys. But let's see. GFS also gives us a little bit more, so we're going to go to pressure and precipitation. Like I said, there's our low pressure system just sitting off the coast. That's not anything tropical. Excuse me. Moving into the future, 18 hours, 24 hours, 30 hours, 36 hours. See Dorian start to creep in to the bottom right here. 36 hours from now, so a day and a half. Then we go further in time. Didn't want to do that. Further in time, you see it start to creep in. 991, 989. The GFS has it strengthening a little bit quicker than the European model does. But overall, the strength seems to be fairly consistent across two. Once it gets to this point, it has the strengthening being slower. So overall, they kind of cancel out. But you see, the GFS has it looking like it's going to follow the same European path into southern Florida, right? But then watch this. The GFS then has it sort of moving more to the north before hitting, looks like right close to Cape Canaveral, probably between more the Daytona area. Looks like it's going to impact right on Daytona with this one. Daytona Beach looks like to be ground zero for this. A 969 Hurricane, looking fairly strong at this point. This is going to be a mid-level Category 3. Winds of about 115 miles per hour, gusting higher. But you see, as it gets to land, it sort of weakens fairly quickly. But the concerning thing for me is it doesn't move much. It sort of sits over Florida for, let me see, I mean, the impacts here, that's 6 hours. Another 6 hours, that's 12 hours. That's 18 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, just constantly sitting over Florida, pounding with this wind and rain. And the main threat at that point is going to be significant storm surge and flooding, as well as wind damage. Once you get all that rain and surge, you don't need as high of winds to knock down trees, take out power, stuff like that. So, like I said, there's a lot of discrepancy right now within the hurricane. What's up, Hunter?
I miss you.
I'm recording a video right now for my followers on YouTube and Facebook.
Oh, what's up, followers?
This is my friend Hunter. He's my roommate this year, also in OU Meteorology. Just talking about how the new GFS run has it sort of sitting over Florida for like 48 hours. And like making landfall like a mid-level Category 3. Other than that, I don't have too much to say on the system right now. I'll update you guys more. Just be ready to take preparations, evacuations, water, generators, stuff of that nature. Just be prepared to have that stuff ready. You still have a week before this makes landfall, so you have plenty of time. No need to panic now, and I'll come back to you guys later.